So sometimes we think we have a research question and it's really hard to drill down to a very specific research question that's a testable hypothesis, which is ultimately what you want to have when you design a research study. So I'm going to provide you with an example of how the task of filtering down to a testable hypothesis can be a bit challenging but not completely impossible. Let's pretend for a minute that you work in a pain clinic at a pediatric health center, and anecdotally you've seen that the kids that are having acupuncture as a complementary therapy on the side are doing much better than the kids that are coming into the pain clinic for medications and other kinds of therapy that are offered at the hospital. So you're wondering, as a clinician, why is it that the health center isn't offering acupuncture as a standard form of care in your pain clinic? So you want to investigate that. So you set up this study where you're going to look at two groups of kids, one that gets pain medications and acupuncture, and one that just gets pain medications. And you want to be able to compare the two groups and see if the acupuncture group is actually doing better than the standard of care group. This is a great study. It's a quasi-experimental design, but it may not be answering the question that you are specifically looking for. You want to know whether or not you can incorporate acupuncture into your clinical service. And this research question that you filtered down to may answer whether acupuncture is better than standard care alone, but it's not answering whether or not it's going to work on your clinical service. So the question you may want to consider next is whether or not acupuncture is not being offered because physicians aren't on board with acupuncture, or maybe parents aren't on board with acupuncture, maybe kids are afraid of needles. Maybe these are all the reasons why acupuncture isn't currently being offered in your clinic. So you start to think, maybe my question is, as a physician, would I be open to having acupuncture offered as a service in my clinic? So you think about setting up a study where you interview physicians to find out whether or not they'd be open to acupuncture. But again, this may not be your question. You're not interested in physicians necessarily. You're interested in whether kids are going to do well with acupuncture and be open and receptive to having acupuncture. So maybe your population are kids. So you want to look at kids. You decide you're going to set up a study that interviews kids, maybe with semi-structured interviews or focus groups, to see what their attitudes are towards acupuncture and whether or not they would want to have acupuncture to help with their complex and chronic pain. That's a really good place to start, and you can see we're starting to filter down to specifically the type of area that you're interested in. But again, even once you get to a question like what are kids' attitudes towards acupuncture, you're still going to have to operationalize different aspects of that specific research question. So what do you mean by kids? There's no point in interviewing a 5-year-old about whether they can have acupuncture, because they're not going to be able to consent to acupuncture. So that's their parents' decision. So maybe you want to look at adolescents who sort of make decisions in partnership with their parents and their care providers, so they would have sort of more of a voice in their decisions for their complex pain care. So maybe you change kids then to adolescents, and even once you decide on adolescents, you have to decide what range of adolescents. The World Health Organization classifies adolescents as 10 to 19 years old. So do you want that full age range, or do you want to take it back and look at older teenagers or middle teenagers or the younger adolescent range? So you can see that even though you have a general research interest that you may think is a very, very good research question, it takes many iterations to filter it down to a very specific research question that can answer a very specific hypothesis. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of thought, but if you're ever stumbling through that process, you can always check in with the interdisciplinary research team at the IWK and